When I first moved into my dream home, I was captivated by the tranquility of the area. Nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, my property featured a beautiful stretch of land bordered by a dense line of trees. It felt like the perfect escape from the chaos of the city until I noticed something strange. At first, it was subtle, a faint trail running through the corner of my land, something I thought was just an old path left by the previous owner. But as the days passed, I began to see more and more evidence of activity, tire tracks cutting into the soil, footprints along the grass, and even a few scraps of litter scattered about. My curiosity grew, and I decided to investigate. One crisp Saturday morning, I grabbed a cup of coffee and stood near the edge of my property, waiting to see if anything unusual would happen. To my disbelief, a car slowly rolled onto my land from a narrow strip that led into the HOA neighborhood nearby. It casually drove across my property as though it were a public road, disappearing into the adjoining street. "That's odd," I muttered to myself. Perhaps it was just a one-off occurrence. Maybe someone got lost and used my land as a quick turnaround? But it wasn't a one-time event. Over the next week, more vehicles began cutting through my property. It wasn't just a few cars, either. It became a regular stream of traffic. Every day, vehicles zipped across the narrow strip of land like it was an extension of the HOA streets. Some even waved at me as if to thank me for allowing the shortcut. My frustration grew as I watched my property turn into an unofficial thoroughfare. The grass I'd planned to keep pristine was now trampled, and the soil was deeply rutted from tire tracks. One afternoon, I even caught a driver spinning their wheels as they turned too sharply, kicking up dirt and leaving a deep gouge in the yard. By this point, I realized it wasn't just an innocent mistake. These people truly believed they had the right to use my land. Determined to put an end to it, I started approaching the drivers. "Excuse me," I said to a man in a silver sedan who had stopped briefly to check his phone. "This is private property. You can't drive through here." He looked at me, startled, and muttered something about how he thought it was a public road. I politely informed him it wasn't and asked him to stop using it. He nodded and drove off, but the stream of cars continued. The breaking point came one evening when I spotted 3 cars lined up, waiting to cross my property. The audacity of it all left me speechless. That night, I stayed up researching my property lines and local laws. I wanted to make sure I had every right to stop this before taking further action. A few days later, I contacted the HOA to see if they had any insight into the situation. Perhaps they could help inform the residents that my land wasn't a public shortcut. But their response left me even more frustrated. "We can't do anything about that," the HOA representative said curtly. "The strip of land isn't within our jurisdiction. It's up to you to handle it." With no help from the HOA, I decided to take matters into my own hands. But little did I know, my decision to protect my property would set me on a collision course with someone I'd later come to know as a member of the HOA board who was about to make my life a lot more complicated. After weeks of growing frustration, I decided to take action. The tire tracks, the litter, and the sheer disrespect for my property were enough to push me to my limit. If no one else was going to step in, I would. The shortcut that had turned my land into a thoroughfare needed to end, and I was ready to ensure it. Early one morning, I contacted a local contractor to discuss building a fence. It was a practical solution, one that would create a clear boundary between my property and the encroaching traffic from the HOA neighborhood. The contractor was professional and sympathetic, nodding as I explained the situation. By the end of the day, plans were drawn up for a sturdy wooden fence with a reinforced gate. Construction began quickly, and with each hammer strike, I felt a sense of relief. Watching the fence take shape was like watching the chaos melt away. As the final boards were nailed into place, I stepped back to admire the structure. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement, my property, my rules. But I didn't anticipate how quickly that statement would ruffle feathers. It started the day after the fence was completed. I was sipping coffee on my porch when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car horn blaring outside. Peering out, I saw a sleek SUV parked just outside the new gate. A woman stood beside it, her arms crossed and her foot tapping impatiently. I didn't recognize her at first, but as I approached, her aura of entitlement made it clear. This was Karen. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and demanding. "Are you the one who put up this fence?" I nodded cautiously. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" Her eyes narrowed, and she gestured dramatically toward the gate. "This is unacceptable. You can't just block off a road that we've been using for years. Do you know how inconvenient this is for everyone in the neighborhood?" I was taken aback, "Ma'am. This isn't a public road. It's my private property, and I have every right to put up a fence." Karen scoffed, her face turning red. "Private property? This has been an access point for the community long before you got here. You can't just waltz in and change everything." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "I'm sorry if this causes inconvenience, but it's my land. I've done my research, and everything about this fence is legal." Karen wasn't hearing any of it. "We'll see about that," she snapped. "I'm on the HOA board, and I'm calling an emergency meeting. You won't get away with this." She stormed back to her car, slamming the door before speeding off, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. I stood there, bewildered. Was she serious? Could the HOA even do anything about my fence? The next few days were tense. I received a formal letter from the HOA requesting a meeting to discuss the unauthorized structure on my property. Unauthorized, the fence was entirely within my boundaries, and I had the permits to prove it. When the day of the meeting arrived, I walked into the HOA office armed with my property survey, construction permits, and a newfound determination. The room was filled with board members, all seated around a long table. Karen sat near the head, her arms crossed and her expression smug. The board president began the discussion, laying out the concerns about the fence. Karen was quick to chime in, painting me as the villain disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. "This shortcut has been a vital access point for years," she argued. "He's blocking it out of sheer selfishness." I waited patiently before speaking. When it was my turn, I presented my documents, explaining that the fence was built entirely within my property lines. I pointed out that the so-called shortcut was trespassing, and that I had every right to protect my land. The room grew quiet as I spoke. Some board members began to murmur, clearly rethinking their stance. Karen, however, was relentless. "This isn't just about legality." She snapped, "It's about community. He's disrupting our way of life." One board member hesitated before replying, "But if it's his property, we don't really have the authority to make him take it down." Karen's face turned crimson. "We'll see about that," she hissed, glaring at me as if I had personally wronged her. The meeting adjourned without a clear resolution, but I left feeling victorious. The board couldn't touch my fence, and Karen's fury only seemed to solidify my resolve. Over the following weeks, Karen escalated her efforts. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood accusing me of being a problematic neighbor. She even sent more letters, demanding I compromise by removing the gate. I ignored her antics, confident in the strength of my case. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and her campaign against my fence was just getting started. Little did I know, the battle was about to take a turn I never saw coming. It didn't take long for Karen to escalate her campaign against me. After her outburst at the HOA meeting and her failed attempts to sway the board, she took a step I hadn't fully expected. She called the police. One quiet Saturday morning, I was working in my garden when I noticed a patrol car pulling up to the gate. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the area before approaching. I wiped the dirt off my hands and walked over to greet them, already suspecting who was behind this visit. "Good morning," one of the officers said. "We received a complaint about a blocked roadway. Can you tell us what's going on?" I sighed, half annoyed and half amused. "This is my property," I explained, gesturing toward the gate and the stretch of land beyond it. "The road in question isn't public, it's private land, and I've put up this fence to stop people from trespassing." The officer nodded, his expression neutral but curious. "Do you have any proof of ownership?" "Of course," I replied, walking back to my house to retrieve the property survey and permits I had meticulously organized in a folder. When I returned, I handed the documents to the officer, who examined them carefully. As he reviewed the papers, Karen appeared out of nowhere, marching up the road in her usual storm of indignation. "Officers," she called out, her voice dripping with self-righteous anger. "He's lying. That road has been in use for years. He's blocking access to the community." The officer held up a hand, signaling for her to stop. "Ma'am, we're looking into it," he said calmly before turning back to me. "This all seems to check out. The property survey shows that the land is indeed private." Karen's face turned red, but it's been a shortcut for decades. She sputtered, "The HOA allows it." The officer raised an eyebrow. "The HOA's jurisdiction doesn't override private property rights. If this gentleman owns the land, he has every right to block access." Karen's frustration boiled over. "You don't understand," she snapped. "This affects the whole neighborhood. We'll take legal action if we have to." The officer remained professional, but his tone grew firmer. "Ma'am, this isn't a criminal matter. If you have legal concerns, you'll need to handle them through civil court." With that, Karen had no choice but to retreat, though not without throwing me one last venomous glare. As she stomped off, I thanked the officers for their time, watched them drive away, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I had won this round, but I knew Karen wasn't done yet. A week later, I received a formal letter from the HOA's lawyer demanding that I remove the gate immediately. The letter was filled with legal jargon, citing vague community access rights, and threatening further action if I didn't comply. I wasn't intimidated. I had anticipated this move and was ready for it. I contacted my own lawyer, who assured me that their claims were baseless. We compiled all the evidence, the property survey, the permits, and even security camera footage showing cars cutting through my land without permission. Still, the situation was far from resolved. The HOA scheduled another meeting, this time with their lawyer present. I walked into the room feeling the weight of the tension, the air thick with the anticipation of a showdown. Karen was there, of course, seated at the head of the table with her arms crossed and a smug smile plastered across her face. Beside her sat a man in a crisp suit, the HOA's hired muscle for this battle. The meeting began with the board president outlining the concerns once again. "The community relies on that access point," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "We need to find a resolution that works for everyone." Karen leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're here to discuss your unreasonable actions," she said, locking eyes with me. "You've disrupted the entire neighborhood with this fence, and we're prepared to take legal steps to ensure it's removed." I waited until she was finished before calmly presenting my case. I laid out the property survey, pointing to the clear boundaries that proved the land was mine. I showed the permits for the fence and even played the security footage, highlighting the damage caused by cars tearing through my yard. "The law is on my side," I said firmly, addressing the room. "This is private property, and I have every right to protect it. The HOA has no authority over land that isn't within its boundaries." The lawyer for the HOA looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through his papers. It was clear that their case was weak, and they hadn't expected me to come so prepared. The board members began murmuring among themselves, and even the president seemed hesitant to press further. But Karen wasn't ready to back down. "This isn't just about legality," she snapped. "It's about the community. Your selfish actions are affecting everyone." The board president finally spoke up, his tone conciliatory. "We'll need to review the legalities further before making any decisions," he said. The meeting adjourned without a resolution, but I could feel the tide turning. The board members were starting to see that Karen's crusade was more about her personal vendetta than any legitimate community concern. As I left the room, Karen shot me one last glare. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't doubt her, but I walked away knowing that I had stood my ground. The battle was far from finished, but I was ready for whatever came next. Karen's fury was relentless. Days after the contentious HOA meeting, I began receiving more aggressive letters now, not just from the HOA, but also from their lawyer. Each letter claimed that my fence was a violation of some undefined community access policy and demanded its immediate removal. They even threatened to sue for damages, citing the alleged inconvenience caused to the neighborhood. I could almost hear Karen's smug voice behind every word. But I knew better than to let their threats rattle me. My lawyer, a calm and steady presence throughout this ordeal, reassured me once again. "They don't have a case," she said confidently. "They're hoping you'll fold under pressure, but legally, you're in the clear." While the legal letters piled up, Karen wasn't content to leave things at that. She started a full-on campaign, rallying neighbors to her side. Flyers began circulating in the HOA community, painting me as the villain of the neighborhood. They accused me of being selfish, uncooperative, and even un-American for denying the community its so-called shortcut. One evening, I walked out to check my mailbox and found a flyer taped to my fence. In bold, capitalized letters, it read, "Neighborhood Menace, help us take back our access." Beneath it was a picture of my gate, along with a sensationalized story about how my actions had caused chaos and hardship for the HOA residents. It was laughable, but it also made me uneasy. I wasn't sure how far Karen and her supporters would go. Things escalated even further one afternoon when I spotted Karen standing just outside my gate with a group of neighbors. They were holding clipboards, clearly collecting signatures for some kind of petition. Karen's voice rang out loud and clear as she spoke to the group. Asterisk, asterisk, this isn't just about a shortcut, she declared. This is about standing up for our rights as a community. We can't let one person ruin things for the rest of us. Asterisk, 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 I decided to confront them. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to the gate and called out, "Karen, what are you doing?" Asterisk, asterisk. She turned to me with that signature smugness. "We're gathering support to file a formal complaint against you," she said. "You've left us no choice." I couldn't help but chuckle. A formal complaint against what? The fact that I'm protecting my property from trespassing? Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're being unreasonable. This affects the entire community. If you won't listen to reason, we'll take this to court." I leaned against the gate, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Karen, you can take it wherever you want. I've done everything by the book. This is my land, and I have every right to protect it. If you think you can twist the law to your advantage, go ahead and try." Her group of supporters looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other, but saying nothing. I could tell some of them were starting to realize they were fighting a losing battle. The following week, the situation reached its peak. I received notice that Karen had officially filed a complaint with the local court, claiming that my fence violated an implied easement that granted the community access to my property. It was a desperate move, but it forced me to prepare for a legal showdown. My lawyer and I spent hours reviewing the case, gathering every piece of evidence we could. I had property maps, permits, photos, and security footage that showed how the road had been used and abused over the past year. We also uncovered something interesting. The so-called implied easement Karen was banking on didn't exist. The land had never been designated for public use, and there was no legal basis for her claim. When the court date arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer by my side, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Karen was there too, flanked by her own lawyer and a handful of HOA supporters. She looked confident, but I noticed a flicker of doubt in her eyes when she saw how prepared we were. The hearing was intense. Karen's lawyer argued that the community had relied on the access point for years and that removing it was unfair and disruptive. But my lawyer dismantled their argument piece by piece, presenting clear evidence that the land was private and had never been part of the HOA's jurisdiction. The judge listened carefully, asking pointed questions that Karen's lawyer struggled to answer. When it was my turn to speak, I told my side of the story, how I had discovered the unauthorized use of my land, the damage it had caused, and the steps I had taken to protect my property. By the time the hearing ended, it was clear which way the decision was leaning. The judge ruled in my favor, stating that the HOA had no legal claim to my property and that I was within my rights to install the fence and gate. Karen's face was a mask of defeat as the verdict was read. For once, she had no retort, no snarky comment, no empty threats. She gathered her papers and left the courtroom without a word. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset and feeling a deep sense of relief. The legal battle had been draining, but it was over. My property and my peace of mind were finally secure. I knew Karen wouldn't take this loss lightly, but I also knew she had exhausted every possible avenue. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I could truly enjoy my dream home. The fence of discord had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that standing up for what's right is always worth it. The days following the court ruling were surprisingly quiet. For the first time in months, I wasn't bombarded with HOA letters or confrontations at my gate. It was as if the storm had finally passed, but I knew the final chapter of this saga was yet to unfold. A week after the verdict, I received an unexpected email from a local news reporter. She had heard about the case and wanted to feature the story as part of a segment on property rights and HOA overreach. At first, I hesitated. After all, I wasn't seeking attention. I just wanted to protect what was mine, but after some thought, I realized this could be an opportunity to shed light on the broader issue. The interview was filmed on a crisp Saturday morning. The reporter stood with me by the fence that had caused so much controversy. As the camera rolled, I shared my experience, how I had discovered the shortcut, the challenges of dealing with the HOA, and the legal battle that followed. I kept my tone measured, avoiding any personal jabs at Karen or the HOA. My focus was on the principle, the importance of standing up for your rights, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. When the segment aired later that evening, it made a bigger splash than I had anticipated. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to express their support. Many shared their own horror stories of dealing with overzealous HOAs, thanking me for speaking out. But the biggest fallout came from within the HOA itself. A few days after the report aired, I received an envelope in the mail from the HOA. For a moment, my heart sank. I assumed it was yet another letter of complaint or veiled threat. But as I opened it, I was met with something completely unexpected. The letter began with an official apology from the HOA board. They acknowledged their mistakes, admitted they had overstepped their boundaries, and confirmed that they would no longer pursue any action against me. The most surprising part came at the end. Karen had been asked to resign from the board. The letter didn't go into details, but it was clear that the news coverage and likely the backlash from other residents had forced their hand. Karen's reign of entitlement had come to an end. The following weekend, I sat on my porch, savoring the tranquility of my property. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't watching for tire tracks or littered shortcuts. The land was mine again, and it finally felt like home. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized how much I had learned not just about property rights, but about perseverance. It wasn't easy standing up to Karen and the HOA, especially when they wielded so much influence. But through research, preparation, and a willingness to fight for what was right, I had reclaimed my peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The battle had been tough, but it was worth it. Now, whenever I see someone drive by on the main road, I can't help but smile. The shortcut may be gone, but I've gained something far more valuable, the peace of knowing I didn't let anyone take advantage of me. My land, my rules, and finally, my peace.